Shut up and dance.
Her fiancé threatened her, right there at the gala, in front of everyone. She had found out something minutes ago, and what she found out shattered her world, her heart, and her relationship. "You will not embarrass me on my own night," he said, his hand firm on her waist, his voice a threat dressed as a whisper. "Smile. Now." What he didn't know was that the Korean mafia was standing feet away, and he had been watching every single thing. If this story already has you feeling something, anything, then stick around so you'll understand why Renee's fiancé is forcing her to dance. And also, if this is your first time seeing this channel, smash the subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because here we tell intriguing stories like this. And, trust me, you don't want to miss any of it. Let's go back to the beginning of the story. Before everything, before the relationship, before soul, the suitcase was open on the bed, and Renee Ellis had been staring at it for 20 minutes without putting anything else inside. Not because she didn't know what to pack. Renee always knew what to pack. She had a list. She had 3 lists. She was the kind of woman who made lists for her lists and felt no shame about it. She was staring at the suitcase because her mother was sitting on the edge of the bed behind her, very quietly, in the way Gloria Ellis got quiet when she was scared and didn't want her daughter to know it. "Mama," Renee said without turning around, "I can hear you thinking." "I'm not thinking anything." "You're thinking very loudly." Gloria was quiet for another moment. Then, "Do you know anyone in Seoul?" "No, not a single person, not yet." Another silence. Renee folded a blazer and set it in the case with the precision of someone who had been packing her own bags since she was 17 and learned early that if you fold things right, nothing wrinkles. There were her high school debate trophies on the shelf above the desk. 3 of them. She hadn't thought about those in years. "Baby," Gloria said. "You don't even speak Korean." Renee laughed. It came from somewhere real, from the part of her that had been working toward this posting for 3 years, that had watched other people get it and waited for her turn, that had sat in meetings and listened to men present her own ideas back to her and smiled through every single one of those moments because she was playing a long game and she knew it. She laughed because the fear in her mother's voice was the same fear that lived in her own chest, and the only thing she knew how to do with fear was laugh at it and then outwork it. "Mama, I speak revenue. That translates everywhere." Gloria got up from the bed. She came around to stand in front of her daughter, and she took Renee's face in both her hands. Those warm, dry Houston hands that had held Renee's face for 31 years, through every scraped knee, and broken heart and job interview and Sunday morning, and she looked at her for a long moment. "Just don't lose yourself," she said, "trying to prove yourself." Renee kissed her forehead. "I'll call you when I land." She called when she landed. What she didn't call about, not for a long time, was everything that happened after. Daesung International Group's Seoul headquarters was on the 13th floor of a building in Yeouido. All glass walls and pale wood, and the kind of deliberate calm that costs a lot of money to maintain. Renee walked through the main doors at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning in October, still carrying a little jet lag behind her eyes, and felt the room do what rooms did when she walked into them. It recalibrated. Not hostility. Nothing as honest as that. It was more like the subtle shift of a machine adjusting its expectations. Quiet, automatic, and over in about 4 seconds. Then people went back to their computers, and their coffee, and their conversations, and Renee found her assigned desk and sat down and opened every client file the system would let her access. She was not here to wait for anyone to be comfortable with her. She had waited long enough for enough rooms. She was here to work. She had been at her desk for less than 20 minutes when he appeared. Kang Junho was 35, Korean, and handsome, in the way that men are handsome when they've put real thought into it. The right haircut, the right suit, the kind of posture that said, "I belong in every room I enter." His English was smooth and American cadenced, the kind you got from watching a lot of television and then living abroad for 2 years. And he brought her coffee without asking what she took in it. He'd already looked. He brought it black. "You must be the new American hire," he said, setting it on her desk with a small, easy smile. "Kang Junho, I'm in the same division." "Renee Ellis." She shook his hand. Thank you for the coffee. How's the Korean? She smiled at him. Catastrophic. He laughed, genuinely, or what seemed like it. I can help with that. This city is easier if you have someone to translate. She thanked him. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was warm and helpful, and he spoke her language in a country where almost no one else did. She was alone in Seoul, and he was the first person who had made that feel manageable. She would spend a long time later trying not to hate herself for how simple it had been. What she didn't see was Junho returning to his desk on the other side of the office, where his neighbor, a man named Choi, who had worked at Daesung for 11 years, glanced up and asked in Korean what he thought of the new hire. Junho shrugged pleasantly. She's very confident, he said. For someone who can't speak Korean. Choi laughed. Junho smiled and opened his laptop. The knife was already in his hand. Renee hadn't felt it yet. Renee's first major solo pitch was to a Korean manufacturing client, a company that had been resistant to Daesung's previous approach for 2 quarters. She sat at the head of a conference room table with Junho positioned off to the side. There as support, he said, in case translation was needed. She opened in Korean. She had been practicing on the subway, in her apartment, and at the small cafe 2 blocks from her building where the owner was patient with her accent. Her Korean was still rough, still heavily American-shaped, and she knew it, and she said so, briefly, warmly, without any self-pity. And then she switched to English, and she worked. For 40 minutes she presented the cleanest, most precisely built sales pitch that conference room had seen in years. She had studied this company the way she studied everything she cared about. Completely. She knew their last 3 years of financial performance. She knew where they'd lost market share and why. She knew their 2 biggest competitors by name and could speak to the specific gaps in those competitors' offerings. She didn't just tell them what Daesung could do. She told them exactly where they were bleeding and exactly how Daesung would close the wound. The client's senior manager leaned forward about 20 minutes in. He stayed leaning forward for the rest of the meeting. She didn't look at Junho once. She didn't need to. Afterward, walking out through the lobby, she was still riding it. That clean, specific high of a room that had come in skeptical and left convinced. She glanced back through the glass doors and saw Junho still inside, talking to a senior colleague who had stayed behind. He caught her eye and smiled, tilting his head toward her in a way that looked like advocacy, like pride. She smiled back. She thought, he's telling them it went well. He was telling them she had prepared obsessively because she couldn't actually read the room intuitively, that she compensated with data because she didn't have instinct, that the pitch was just good enough, and she couldn't afford to walk in underprepared because she was already at a disadvantage. The colleague nodded, filing it away. Renee pushed through the door into the October air, still smiling, her presentation folder under her arm. Behind her, through the glass, Junho was still talking. What neither of them mentioned to that colleague was that Renee had just closed a deal that Junho had been assigned and failed to close in Q2. CEO Lee Byung-ho came to her desk himself. That wasn't something he did often. The man ran a division of 400 people, and his time was measured in 15-minute blocks. But he came to her desk, shook her hand, and told her she was being promoted. She found Junho in the break room 2 minutes later, breathless, still holding her phone. He hugged her, genuinely or what felt like it. He said into her ear, I put in a good word. I've been talking to the right people. You're welcome. She laughed. She bought him dinner that Friday. She thanked him for the whole meal, and he accepted it, with the modest warmth of a man who knew he deserved it. The promotion recommendation had been written by the CEO office 9 days before Junho claimed he said anything to anyone. It cited her conversion rate, her client retention numbers, and one specific line that CEO Lee had added himself. Ellis demonstrates an understanding of client psychology that is uncommon at this tenure level. Junho had nothing to do with it. He never had anything to do with any of it. He simply stood close enough to the warmth she generated and let her believe he was the source. The pretense continued in break rooms, in elevator rides, and in the corridor outside the printer. Renee would be at her desk and she would look up and see Junho across the office, talking to someone, a senior colleague, a team lead, or once the head of the international division. And he would glance toward her, and there would be a small gesture, a nod in her direction, the body language of a man making a case for someone. She would look back at her screen, feeling grateful, feeling held. What was actually being said, in Korean she couldn't follow. She doesn't even work as hard as any of us, yet she gets all the glory. Honestly, I'm happy for how lucky she is. Maybe it's because she's a woman. You know. The foreign clients find her interesting. I think that helps more than the actual pitch. I honestly don't know how she closes them so consistently, said with a pause. A small, loaded pause that said the rest of the sentence without saying it. The pause that let the listener's imagination finish the thought, so Junho's hands stayed clean. She never knew. She watched him advocate for her across rooms and felt lucky. She kept her head down and closed more deals, and the numbers stacked up, and she thought, this is what it looks like when someone believes in you. They began dating the way things happen when you are lonely in a foreign city, and one person is consistently kind. Gradually, then all at once, he took her everywhere. He translated menus and street signs, and the facial expressions of colleagues she couldn't yet read. He made Seoul feel navigable. He held her hand on the subway and pointed out neighborhoods and told her the history of streets she would have walked through blind without him. He made her feel, for the first time since she'd landed, like she was not entirely alone in a city of 10 million strangers. She called her mother one Sunday morning, Seoul time, Houston still in its Saturday evening. His name is Junho. He works with me. Gloria let a beat pass. Is he good to you? Well, Mama, he's very helpful, she said. The silence between good to you and helpful was the size of everything that came next. By the time Renee had been in Seoul for 2 years, she had built a life that surprised her. She had a favorite street in Bukchon where she liked to walk on Sunday mornings, a stretch of old hanok walls and persimmon trees that turned amber in October and made her feel, for reasons she couldn't explain, like she belonged somewhere. A bakery near her apartment where the woman behind the counter had learned her order and had it waiting before she reached the register. A Korean tutor named Mrs. Han who met her every Tuesday in a small room above a stationery shop in Jongno, patient, precise, and given to long silences that felt more like gifts than gaps, who had told her 3 times that Renee had a good ear and should trust herself more. Her Korean was functional. She could navigate daily life, handle phone calls, follow the shape of most conversations even when the speed left her behind. She understood more than people assumed she did in rooms where they assumed she understood nothing. She had been quietly improving for 2 years. Junho knew this. He managed it carefully. When she spoke Korean confidently in his presence, at dinner, at a work function, or anywhere he could hear, he corrected her immediately. Sometimes it was gently, with a small tilt of the head that said almost. Sometimes it was with a brief laugh that said, it's charming that you try, more clearly than words could. The laugh was never cruel. That was the thing about it. It was the laugh of a man who found her endearing, which was somehow worse, because endearing was another word for small. Over 2 years, with the patience of someone who understood exactly what he was doing, he had introduced a doubt into the space between her and her own voice. She second-guessed herself before she opened her mouth now. She deferred to him in rooms where she didn't need to. She apologized for an accent that Mrs. Han had told her 3 times was perfectly understandable. She was now senior regional account manager. He was sales manager, the same title level, technically. She had eclipsed him in every number that mattered, and they both knew it. At night sometimes she caught him watching her from the kitchen doorway while she worked at the table, her laptop open, files spread around her coffee cup. He would be standing there with that expression she had learned, not to look at too long, not anger exactly, not contempt exactly, something that lived underneath both of those things and had no clean name. She would glance up. He would shift his face into something softer, and she would think, he's tired. Work has been hard. She filed it there. Under he's tired. She was very good at filing things under the wrong heading. He had been teaching her to do that for 2 years. In Renee's first month at Daesung, the person who was easiest to be around was a junior colleague named Ha Yoon. Ha Yoon was 29 and quick and funny in a dry way that didn't need translation. She would slide a handwritten note across the desk, a translation of something a client had said in a meeting, a heads up about an office dynamic, once just the Korean word for exhausted, written on a post-it because she could see it on Renee's face at 4 p.m. on a Friday, and wanted her to know she understood. She texted restaurant recommendations at random hours with no explanation, just an address and a single emoji. She made Renee feel, in the small ways that matter most, like she was welcome. Junho ended it in about 6 months, not dramatically. He was never dramatic. He told Renee in pieces over time that Ha-yoon talked, that she'd said things to other colleagues, that Renee's numbers were inflated, that the company was giving her favorable accounts to make the American hire look like a success, that it wasn't really a fair comparison. He mentioned specific conversations. He was patient about it. Never pushed, never demanded she cut the friendship, just kept introducing the information the way you introduce a smell into a room. So gradually that by the time anyone notices, it's already everywhere. Renee pulled away from Ha-yoon, naturally. The way you pull away from anyone when you believe, without being able to point to the moment you started believing it, that they don't really wish you well. Ha-yoon texted. Ha-yoon offered to grab lunch. Ha-yoon pretended not to notice when Renee was distant and kept showing up anyway. The way people do when they know something is wrong but can't name it. Eventually, she stopped. By year 2, they were polite strangers, and Renee told herself it was fine, that not all work friendships lasted, that people drifted, and that not all colleagues should be your friend. It was a Sunday in February. Outside the apartment window, Seoul was gray and cold, the kind of afternoon that made staying inside with hot tea feel like a decision rather than a default. Junho spread the papers on the kitchen table while Renee was still filling the kettle. "Visa renewal forms," he said. "All in Korean, I'll walk you through each one." She set 2 mugs down and sat beside him. He smelled like the soap he always used. The apartment was warm, and the papers looked bureaucratic and dull, exactly the kind of thing she was grateful to have him for. She had learned not to attempt Korean government documents alone. She had learned that lesson when she'd tried to complete a residency form in her first month and spent 3 hours on something that took him 20 minutes. He turned the first page toward her and began to explain. His voice was patient. It was always patient when he was teaching her something. That particular register of warmth that said, "You need me for this, and I don't mind." He went through each form the way a good teacher goes through a text, summarizing in clean English, telling her where to sign, telling her what she was agreeing to. She signed where he pointed. She trusted him. He was the person she had relied on to interpret this country for 2 years, and he had never once given her a reason not to. She watched his face while he talked and thought about what she wanted to make for dinner. She thought about a client call she needed to prep for on Tuesday. She thought about calling her mother. She did not bother about the documents. She had no way to really read the documents. That was the entire arrangement. He read. He explained. She signed. It had worked for 2 years. The tea finished steeping. She poured it. He gathered the signed forms into a neat stack and said he would drop them off on Monday. She washed the mugs after dinner. She went to bed. She slept. The Sunday passed the way Sundays do when nothing appears to be wrong. Park Ji-yeon joined Daesung in January as an intern, 23 years old, with the kind of eager brightness that certain kinds of men read as an invitation. Junho read it that way within 2 weeks. He started with coffee. He had a gift for coffee. He knew what everyone took. He remembered. He showed up with it at exactly the right moment. He brought Ji-yeon an Americano on her 3rd day, when she looked overwhelmed by a spreadsheet she couldn't parse, and he sat beside her and walked her through it with the patience of a man who had nowhere else to be. He was senior. He was handsome. He spoke to her like her questions were intelligent, which was the most intoxicating thing anyone had done for her since she'd started. By the end of January, he had her personal number. He texted her things about work, useful things, thoughtful things, the kind of guidance that made her feel like she'd been noticed by someone who mattered. By mid-February, the texts were arriving after midnight. She knew he had a girlfriend. Everyone in the office knew about Renee, the American, the closer, the one Junho was always subtly positioning himself beside. But the way Junho talked about Renee, in the small, careful ways he talked about her when Ji Yeon was around. She's under a lot of pressure right now. She needs space. We're in a complicated place. Made the situation sound like something already ending. Something he was navigating out of at great personal cost. Ji Yeon believed him. She was 23, and he was the first person in that building who had treated her like she was worth believing. The affair began on a Thursday in late February. He took her to a restaurant in Mapo that was far enough from Yeouido that no one from Daesung would walk past. He ordered for both of them because he knew the menu and she didn't, and he talked to her like she was interesting, like her opinions about things mattered, like he had been waiting to have exactly this conversation with exactly her. She went home that night thinking she was the exception, that he had recognized something in her that the rest of the world had missed. He was home by 11. Renee was at the kitchen table, with her laptop, files spread around her coffee cup, working the way she always worked, completely, with every part of herself. He kissed the top of her head. He asked how the client call had gone. He listened to her answer, with the attentiveness she had always loved about him, the way he made whoever he was talking to feel like the only person in the room. She told him about the call. She told him she thought she had a good shot at closing by end of quarter. He said he believed her. He made them both tea and went to bed. On the nights he couldn't get away, he texted Jiyeon from the bathroom. Long texts, personal, the kind of thing a man sends when he wants a woman to believe she has access to the real version of him. He told Jiyeon things about himself that he framed as confessions, that he felt unseen at work sometimes, that he wondered if he'd made the right choices, that talking to her made him feel like himself again. He was very good at the confession that wasn't one, the vulnerability that cost him nothing. What he did not tell Jiyeon, he had been telling versions of this story his entire adult life. The story of a man who was almost free, who just needed a little more time, who had found in this particular woman something rare and worth waiting for. What he did not tell Renee, anything. Renee came home one evening in March, and Junho was on the balcony on his phone. He ended the call when he heard the door. She registered that, the way you register small things without knowing why, and came inside and asked about her day. She told him. She had learned by then not to examine the small things she registered. She had a word for that, overthinking. He had given her that word. By April, Junho was engaged to Renee and sleeping with Jiyeon on Tuesday and Thursday evenings when he told Renee he was working late on the Hansi account. The Hansi account was real. The late nights were not. He kept them both in separate compartments of himself, with the practiced ease of a man who had been doing this long enough that the compartments no longer required effort to maintain. Jiyeon thought she was waiting for something real to begin. Renee thought she was building something real that had already begun. Neither of them knew about the other's version of the same man. That was the part he was best at. Not the lying itself, but the specific calibration of each lie, so that neither woman ever had enough information to see the full picture. Jiyeon knew there was a girlfriend, but believed she was almost gone. Renee knew there was an intern, but knew her as a colleague, a name on a team list. Someone Junho occasionally mentioned in passing with the mild professional interest of a man managing a junior employee. He held them both in place with the same skill he used to hold everything in place, by making sure each person only ever saw the piece of the picture he chose to show them. The Yoon Group account arrived at Daesungung's Seoul division in September, and it was the biggest thing any of them had ever touched. A multi-year contract for luxury real estate advisory and private hospitality consulting. The kind of deal that, if it closed, would change the division's entire year. The CEO brought it to his best closer, Renee Ellis. She went alone. She stood at the front of a conference room on the 32nd floor of the Yoon Group's tower in Gangnam, with her materials and her preparation and nobody beside her. And she did what she did. She opened in Korean. She apologized for her accent. Briefly, genuinely, with none of the performed self-deprecation that insecure people use as a shield. And then she switched to English, and she pitched. Yoon Taejin was 42. He had the kind of face that had made its peace with giving nothing away. He sat at the head of the table with his deputy, Na Yejin, beside him, and he did not lean forward or nod or offer any of the small signals that people offer when they want the person presenting to them to know they're engaged. He just watched, with the complete unhurried attention of a man who never watched things that didn't interest him. Renee had studied the Yoon group the way she studied everything she cared about. Until she knew it better than the people inside it knew it. She knew which of their properties had underperformed in the last 2 fiscal years, and she knew why. She knew their expansion targets and where the gaps were. She had built a proposal that didn't describe what Daesung could offer in general. It described exactly what the Yoon group needed specifically and why Daesung was the answer to that exact need, and not someone else's version of it. She spoke for 40 minutes. Taejun said nothing. Na Yejin made 2 notes. At the end, Taejun asked 2 questions. They were technical and precise, the kind that sorted people who had truly prepared from people who had performed preparation. She answered both, without pause. Correctly. He looked at her for a moment. Not long, not warm, just direct and complete. All right, he said. I'll send the formal documentation by end of week, she said. The meeting ended. People gathered their things. Taejun did not move immediately from his chair. He watched Renee collect her materials with the efficient calm of someone who had done something well and knew it and didn't need anyone to tell her so. Back at Daesung, Junho heard how the meeting had gone through the office the way news always traveled, in pieces through other people. He told a colleague in Korean, pleasantly, that the Yoon group had a weakness for novelty. An American woman is novel, he said. Let's see if the numbers hold. He went back to his desk. 3 weeks before the gala, CEO Lee Byung-go called Junho into his office for what he framed as a courtesy conversation. He wanted to create a new position, Director of Strategic Acquisitions, Seoul, a title that had never existed at Daesung before, built around the exact kind of work Renee had been doing for 2 years. An office with a window, an international travel budget, the kind of role that didn't just change a year, it changed a life. He was telling Junho as a professional courtesy, her partner, a trusted senior colleague. He wanted to make sure the team dynamic would be fine. In the 3 seconds before Junho spoke, something behind his eyes opened. Not decision. Something that had been waiting. Something that had probably been waiting for 2 years. Sir. Measured. The voice of a man carrying something difficult out of love. I want to be sensitive about this. Renee would never ask for space herself. You know how she is. But I think you need to know. A pause, timed precisely. She told me recently, she's pregnant. We're expecting. CEO Lee's face shifted immediately to warmth. We're even engaged, Junho continued. But I'm worried that she won't be able to carry out this role. You know, a pregnant woman has a heavier workload than just work. She's only 8 weeks. She doesn't show yet, and she's pushing herself at full intensity the way she always does. I just don't want her to feel pressured. If you can wait until we've settled our work-family dynamics, that'll be good. I can even bring her in so you'll ask her if she can cope. Oh, no. Don't bother about that. Thanks so much for informing me. The CEO looked at Junho for a long moment. He had known this man for 6 years. He saw in front of him a partner who had walked into his office because he loved someone enough to step in front of their ambition and take the blow himself. He saw care. Thank you for trusting me with this, he said. Please don't tell her I told you this myself, Junho said, standing. She'd hate that I said anything. She'd probably prefer to tell you herself. He left the CEO's office, went directly to the men's room, stood at the sink, looked at himself in the mirror. Then he straightened his collar and went back to his desk and opened his laptop and returned 17 emails before lunch. 2 days later, he proposed. Because it would be suspicious if he was engaged to Renee and she did not have a ring on her finger. And when you start lying, you have to keep it going. He chose the restaurant they had been going to for a year, the one where the owner knew their order and the corner table by the window was always somehow available. He got down on one knee between the appetizers and the main course, and the couple at the next table started clapping before Renee could process what was happening. She cried before he finished the question. The word yes came out of her, wet and half-lawing, and she didn't recognize her own voice. He slid the ring onto her finger and she looked at it, at the way the restaurant light hit it. at the specific warm gold of it against her skin. And she felt something open in her chest so wide it almost frightened her. This is the best thing that has ever happened to me. She actually thought that with the complete sincerity of someone who has no reason not to. She held it in both hands and it was real. She was sure it was real. She excused herself to the bathroom, stood with her back against the wall, mascara already done, and called her mother. It was early morning in Houston. Gloria answered on the second ring, with the voice of someone who had been half awake already, the way mothers are when they know their children need something before the phone even rings. Mama. Renee's voice broke on the word. Mama, baby, what happened? He proposed. She laughed and cried at the same time, standing in a restaurant bathroom in Seoul. He proposed, Mama. Gloria screamed. Renee laughed harder. Gloria said, thank God, oh thank God, baby, and then show me the ring. Renee held up the phone. Gloria looked at her daughter's face on the screen, tear-streaked, lit up, completely unguarded, and she said, you look so happy. She was. That was the truth and the tragedy of it, and there was no way to see one without the other. She was completely, wholly, devastatingly happy, and her happiness was exactly what made this so unbearable to witness. Not what he had done, not what he was. It was the fact that she was standing in a restaurant bathroom in Seoul, holding her hand up to her mother's face on a phone screen, with mascara on her cheeks and a ring on her finger, and not a single shadow of doubt. She went back to the table. He stood when he saw her coming, the way he always did. He took her hand. She sat down across from him in the warm light of the restaurant they both loved, and the food came, and they talked about nothing and everything the way people do when they've just decided their whole future together, and she was happy for the entire rest of the meal. He watched her. He waited for the dessert menu. He felt nothing except the clean satisfaction of something landing exactly where he aimed it. The team meeting was at 9. CEO Lee stood at the front of the room with the measured tone of a man who had rehearsed this and was confident in it. New strategic direction. A new position to reflect the division's growing ambitions. Director of Strategic Acquisitions. Seoul Kong Junho's name. The room absorbed this. Renee's hands were in her lap. She pressed them flat against her thighs, under the table where no one could see, and she clapped with everyone else. She smiled. She had spent 2 years learning to do both of those things at the same time in situations that required it. She did them now, cleanly, automatically, with nothing showing on her face. Afterward, she found Junho in the corridor. Did you know? She asked. He looked surprised. It was genuine surprise. He didn't expect to have the promotion. He felt it would fall into another person's hands, and he had been okay with it falling into anybody's hands. As long as it wasn't Renee. She wasn't supposed to be better than him. I'm as shocked as you are, honestly. He took her hands. But Renee, you're next. Byung-ho told me specifically. You're being tracked for the next opening. We're engaged. We're building a life together. We'll also grow together. She searched his face. She had been reading this face for 2 years, and she had always found what she was looking for in it. The warmth, the steadiness, the man who had been her anchor in a city she'd arrived in alone. She found all of those things now. Okay, she said. I love you, he said. I love you too, she said. She went back to her desk. She opened a client file. She did not allow herself to sit with the feeling that something was wrong because she did not have the right words yet, and without the right words, there was nowhere to put it. She filed it. Under timing. Under this is just how it goes sometimes. Under he loves me, and he would not do anything to me. She filed it very carefully, and she went back to work. The venue was a tower in Gangnam with a full floor of glass 60 stories above Seoul. On the night of the gala, it blazed with light, the kind of place you see from a plane at night and wonder about. The kind that makes the city below it look like something a person could actually reach. The Yoon Group deal was the centerpiece of the evening. Daesung's greatest commercial achievement. There was a banner. There were speeches being planned. There was champagne in tall glasses, and a string quartet, playing something that flowed above the conversation and made everything feel significant. It was also the official announcement of Junho's promotion to his new office, and they were allocating credit for the latest closed deal to him, since he was already engaged to Renee, and she wasn't able to take the position. Renee's name was not on the banner. She had chosen her dress herself, a sophisticated golden gown, long and structured, with a neckline that required confidence to wear, and the kind of silhouette that didn't apologize for the person inside it. She'd done her own hair. She'd stood in front of the bathroom mirror that morning and decided, without telling anyone, to wear it natural. One small act of being exactly herself before fleeing into a room that had been taking pieces of her for 2 years. She would need that later. She would need to remember she'd made at least one choice today that was entirely hers. Junho stood beside her in a dark suit, working the room with the ease of a man who had already decided the evening belonged to him. She watched him, the handshakes, the laughter that landed at exactly the right moment, the way he drew people into his orbit. She had watched this for 2 years and called it charm. She held a champagne glass she hadn't touched. Yoon Taejun arrived without announcement. He walked into a room full of people performing their own importance, and he simply walked through it, and the room adjusted around him the way it adjusts around a change in weather. Not because he demanded it, but because something about the way he moved made performance seem beside the point. Na Yejin was beside him. 2 others at a careful remove. He saw Renee before she saw him. He stopped moving for just a moment, too briefly for anyone to catch, and then he continued across the floor with his drink in his hand. Na Yejin, tracking his attention. Seems like she's here with someone. Taejun without inflection. Yejin, I'm not blind. I see that. He found his position in the room and held it, with the patience of a man who had never once needed to hurry because the outcome had always been going to be the same. An hour in, Renee was standing at the edge of the dance floor with her untouched champagne, watching Junho work a cluster of executives, when Kim Suman appeared beside her. Suman was 48. She had worked for Daesung for 19 years. She had spent those years in rooms full of important men, and she had learned to keep her face so still that most people had stopped noticing she was watching. She was very good at being underestimated. She had used it carefully and saved it for the right occasion. She stood beside Renee and did not look at her. I need to tell you something, she said. Her English was deliberate, each word placed. And you must not react. Not here. Renee went still from the inside out. 3 weeks ago, Suman said, facing forward, the day before the director announcement. Your fiancé had a private meeting with CEO Lee. I prepare every meeting on that calendar. I know every meeting. The string quartet played on. Someone's across the room burst out laughing at something. He told the CEO you were pregnant, that you could not manage the travel, that he was worried about you. So you won't be able to take the promotion. The champagne glass was cold in Renee's hand. She was aware of that. The cold of the glass and the music and the laughter from across the room and Suman's voice, very quiet, very steady. I have 3 children. A pause. I know what a pregnant woman looks like at 8 weeks. And honestly, you don't look like one. I'm sorry if I'm wrong, though. I just want to share my suspicions with you. Another pause. And I know how that man speaks about you when you are not in the room. For 2 years I have heard it, and I told myself it was not my place. She finally looked at Renee, briefly, directly, the eyes of a woman who had made a decision somewhere between her desk and the gala floor and was not going to unmake it. I have a daughter who just started her first job, a beat. I decided tonight it was my place. Then she moved away into the crowd and the gala went on. And for everyone else in that room, nothing had happened. Renee stood at the edge of the dance floor, and the music played, and the chandeliers kept burning, and across the room, her fiancé laughed at something someone said. She held her champagne glass. She did not move. She did not react. She pressed her thumb against the cold side of the glass and she breathed. She needed one moment, just one moment, to run the numbers. She had built her entire career on walking into rooms with incomplete information and assembling it, faster than anyone else, more completely, until the picture stood in front of her, and she could act. She did that now. Junho told the CEO she was pregnant 2 days before he proposed. 2 days. The engagement gave the lie 3 dimensions. A fiancé is more credible than a girlfriend. The story needed to feel like they were really expecting. The story needed a woman who believed it was true, and he was finally proposing. He was probably going to end the relationship months later. He had already written the speech. She could almost hear it. Cultural differences, the pressure of working together. I'm so sorry. I care about you too much to keep doing this. The breath she took came out unsteady. She made the next one steadier. She thought about the director position, about his face in the corridor afterward. You're next. Just timing, the ease of it, the warmth of it. The way she had wanted to believe it so much that she had not heard what was underneath it. She thought about 2 years of watching him talk to colleagues across rooms. The gestures toward her that she had read as advocacy. All the promotions she had assumed he had shaped. She thought about all the times he'd ever claimed to speak to anyone. He was probably lying all those times. She thought about Mrs. Han saying, "You have a good ear, trust yourself more," and the way Junho's small laugh had been quietly, methodically dismantling that instruction every time she'd tried to act on it. She thought about Ha-Yun's face. The last time they'd really spoken. Hurt and confused. Not knowing why Renee had pulled away, and Renee not being able to tell her because she hadn't known herself, because she'd believed a story someone had built so carefully she'd thought she'd written it herself. She assembled it, every piece, every moment she had filed under the wrong heading for 2 years. Not because she was stupid, not because she was weak, but because she had trusted one person in this city completely, and that person had been studying her, studying trust, and learning exactly which words to use to make her trust him completely. She stood at the edge of the gala floor, and the full picture stood in front of her, and she couldn't pretend she didn't see it. Then she took one breath. She smoothed the front of her golden gown with one hand, and she crossed the room toward her fiancé. She reached him between conversations. She said his name once. He turned with his public smile, the warm, "This is my night" smile. And he read something in her face that he had never seen there before. His hand was at her elbow before she could say another word, steering her smoothly toward the windows. Seoul spread below through the glass. Beautiful and enormous, and going on without any of this. Tell me about the meeting with CEO Lee. Her voice was level. It cost her something to keep it that way, but she paid. 3 weeks ago. The one where you told him I was pregnant. His smile recalibrated. The warmth dialed back to something neutral. Behind it, there was nothing. Who told you that? Tell me it isn't true. He looked at her. And then she watched something happen in his face that she had never seen before. The performance becoming too expensive. Not dropping into rage, but dropping into nothing. Into the absence that had always been underneath the warmth that she had glimpsed sometimes in the kitchen doorway and filed away under, "He's tired." He wasn't tired. He had just never been caught before. "Lower your voice," he said. "You told him I was pregnant." She did not lower her voice. She did not raise it. "You proposed to me so the lie would look real. You took the position that was mine. What do you want me to say?" Something settled in him. Not guilt, not rage. Just the flat, functional tone of a man who has decided the performance is no longer worth the energy. That you're talented? Fine, you are. But you came here not speaking a word of Korean, not understanding how anything in this country works. And I translated this entire city for you for 2 years. You would have spent your first year completely lost. Helping me navigate a country, she said, is not the same as earning my work for me. No. His voice was pleasant again. That other kind of pleasant, automatic. The reflex that ran so deep it was the last thing to go. But you'd have none of this without me, and some part of you has always known it. She looked at him steadily. I'm going to CEO Lee tonight. I'm going to tell him I am not pregnant. I have never been pregnant. And that the director position was awarded on the basis of a lie you told him. The pleasantness closed like a shutter coming down, over a window. He reached out. He took her wrist. Not violently, with the practiced firmness of a man who had calculated exactly how much force leaves no mark. He had done this calculation before. The grip said, I know what I'm doing more clearly than any words. He pulled her toward the dance floor. Not toward him. Toward the center of the room. A redirection. A correction. The gesture of a man reminding a woman of where she stood. Then. And this was the thing she would remember for the rest of her life. The thing that would come back to her at 3 a.m. for years. The thing she would tell people about and watch their faces change. He reached up with his other hand and wiped the tears from her face, not tenderly. It was the way you wipe condensation from a surface you're about to use. "You will shut up," he said very quietly. His hand moved to her waist and he began to move her onto the dance floor, and his face rearranged itself into the expression of a man enjoying his engagement party. The cologne he wore, the one she had always associated with being held, with Sunday mornings, with the particular safety of having someone who knew where you were, pressed against her. And she felt sick, with the knowledge of what that smell would mean to her now, forever, in every room she ever smelled it in. "And you will dance." He pulled her close. His voice went nearly gentle. "You will smile, and you will get through this evening, and we will discuss this at home. You will not embarrass me on my own night. Let go." The documents. 2 words, set down between them like a weight. "That document you signed that Sunday months ago is not what you think it is. It is fraud, and you committed it all by yourself." There was shock on her face. "What?" "It wasn't fraud. It was my Emmy." She was thinking to herself as another strand of tears and realization flowed. She had believed him for so long. She couldn't even begin to imagine the power she'd given to him. How had she signed documents based only on his words? "It's not your immigration. It's fraud. My fraud. Oh, sorry. Your own fraud now. I'll remind you that you have no say here, and you'll be quiet or you'll go to jail," he said coldly. His eyes held hers over her shoulder. They were completely calm. "You understand what I'm saying?" She understood. Around them the gala moved on. Conversations, laughter, the soft clink of glasses, and the string quartet, playing something that was designed to make everything feel significant. She was in a golden dress, under chandelier light, with his hand on her waist, and the tears drying on her face because she could not wipe them. His hands were occupied, one on her waist and one pressing the small of her back, keeping her exactly where he needed her. She thought, oddly, about the corner table at the restaurant in Itaewon. The way the light had hit the ring, the way she had looked at it and thought, "This is the best thing that has ever happened to me," and how completely, wholly, devastatingly true that had felt. "I'm going to need you to stop crying and smile," he said, against her temple. "Right now. Take your hand off her. Now that you're all caught up, let's talk about how terrible Junho is as a partner. No one would drag you down more than a jealous lover. Honestly, we all have to be careful about who we choose to stay in our lives. Now tell us if you've ever experienced a partner like Junho. Tell us in the comments section, and also tell us where you're watching from. And if you've still not subscribed after watching this far, then don't procrastinate any further. Smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you're among the first to get updates for more stories like this." The voice came from behind Junho's left shoulder. Not loud, not needing to be. It carried the way certain voices carry, not through force but through the absolute certainty of a man who has never once, in his entire life, needed to repeat himself. Yoon Tae-jun stood 3 feet away. He was not performing anything. Behind him, at a precise remove, Na Yejin watched Junho with the focused attention of someone who had completed her assessment and was simply waiting for the appropriate moment. Junho's hand dropped from Renee's waist. He turned. He saw who was standing there. She watched it move through his face in sequence. Recognition. Calculation. The rearrangement of a man who has just understood that he is standing in front of the last person in Seoul who would be impressed by anything he could do next. He had never been less powerful in his life. He would not be less powerful than this again. She understood that even then, watching his face. Mr. Yoon. Smooth, immediate, the recovery instinct of someone who had been recovering in real time for 6 years. "I apologize. This is a private. I know what it is." Taejun looked at Renee. "Are you all right?" Her jaw was tight. Her hands were steady because she was making them steady. "I'm fine." "You're not," he said simply. "But that's the right answer for this room." He looked at Junho then. The quality of that look was not theatrical. It was not rage or menace or performance of any kind. It was the look of a man communicating a final, complete, entirely unhurried verdict. "The deal your company is celebrating tonight was closed by her. She sat in my conference room. She answered my questions. You were not present for any meaningful part of it. The deal was a team. I know whose work it was. I was there." He adjusted his watch. "Leave while that is still your choice." Junho looked at Renee one last time. His expression said, "This isn't over." She held his gaze, and her expression said nothing at all, which was the most frightening thing she had ever done. Then he turned and walked through the gala crowd, and the music didn't stop, and the chandeliers kept burning. And nobody noticed a man leaving who had just watched his entire plan come undone in under 4 minutes. That was how it worked in elegant rooms. The violence wore a suit and left quietly, and the party went on. Renee stood in her golden dress. The tears were drying on her face. She didn't know yet what she was. She only knew what she wasn't anymore. Taejin moved to stand beside her at the window and gave her a moment without filling it. Below them, Seoul, vast and lit and completely indifferent. "Your name is not on that banner," he said. "It's a team achievement. You pitched it alone. I was in the room." He looked out at the city. "I requested you specifically for the follow-up meeting. Your company tried to send someone else. I refused." She looked at him. "I don't conduct contracts at this scale as a courtesy," he said. "You closed the contract because you're terrifyingly good at reading your clients. You read my business like a book, and I was really impressed." She had been told she was talented before. She had been told she was impressive. She had been managed and promoted and maneuvered, and she had been complimented as a tool for all of those things. This was not any of those. This was a man who had been in the room and had seen what she actually was, not what he needed her to be, not what was useful for her to believe about herself, just what she was, what she had always been before someone spent 2 years teaching her to call it something smaller. She looked away. Her throat was tight. "The documents he mentioned," Taejun said. "Do you know what you signed? How much did you hear?" "Enough." She studied him. She knew who the Yoon Group was. Anyone who worked in this city's corporate world knew the name. She was standing at the edge of a gala with no legal knowledge. A fiancé who had just threatened her immigration status, and a stranger who was offering her something that might be help, or might be its own kind of cage. She was also the woman who had walked into his conference room 6 weeks ago and closed the deal of her company's year without a single moment of hesitation. "I don't know exactly what I signed," she said. "He told me they were visa renewal forms. I couldn't read them. Do you have copies?" "No," he nodded. "Then the first thing is copies," he said simply, as if the road forward were just a sequence of steps and they were standing at the first one. "Don't go home with him tonight." "I can't just. Not tonight." Na Yejin appeared, precise, unhurried, and held out a phone with an address on the screen. An apartment in Mapo. Clean, secure, not connected to the Yoon Group publicly. "Memorize that," Taejun said. She looked at the address. She memorized it. "Rennie." She looked up at him. "Everything you built in that company. You built it. That was true before this evening, and it will be true after it, regardless of what any of this becomes." She handed the phone back to Na Yejin. She picked up the champagne glass she hadn't touched all evening. She took one sip, slow, and set it back down. Then she squared her shoulders, and she went back into the gala, and she finished the evening standing on her own 2 feet, which was the only place she had ever actually stood, even when she hadn't known it. She didn't go home with Junho. She texted him from the lobby. "Staying with a colleague tonight." He texted back 4 times. She watched the notifications arrive, and she did not open any of them. She found a 24-hour cafe in Hongdae, and she sat at a table by the window with a cold Americano, and she looked at the street outside. It was 2 light a.m., and Seoul was still moving. Taxis. A group of university students walking fast and loud. A man pulling a cart of something toward a market that wouldn't open for hours. The fluorescent light inside the cafe was unflattering to everyone, and didn't care. A couple shared a piece of cake 2 tables over. They were arguing quietly about something small, the way couples argue about small things late at night, and watching them made Renee's throat close in a way she hadn't expected. She called her mother. It was 11 a.m. in Houston. Gloria answered on the second ring. "Baby? Mama." Renee's voice was steady. She had been making it steady for hours. "I think I've been very stupid." "With the job?" "With the man." Silence. Then very quietly, "How bad?" "I need a lawyer, and I need you to not be scared because I'm going to be okay. But I need to tell you what happened." She told her all of it. The documents, the pregnancy lie, the promotion, and the 2 years of being managed down in corridors she couldn't access. She told it in the flat, organized voice she used when she couldn't afford to feel things yet. She told it straight through without stopping. Gloria did not interrupt. Not once, not a breath. When Renee finished, the line was quiet for a moment. Then Gloria said, "You know what you got from me, and from your daddy, and from his daddy, and from every Ellis before that. Mama, you got an inability to stay down. That's what we gave you. Generations of people who got back up, and you are the latest one." A pause. "You call me in the morning. I'll find you a lawyer. Tonight, you go sleep." After she hung up, Renee sat in the cafe for a long time. She was not thinking about Junho. She was thinking, oddly, about the ring. The way it had looked under the restaurant light at the table in Itaewon, warm gold against her hand. She had looked at it and thought, "This is the best thing that has ever happened to me." She had thought that with everything she had. She had been so sure. She pressed her hand flat on the cafe table and looked at where the ring wasn't anymore. She had put it in her evening bag in the lobby of the venue. She didn't know when she had done that. Her body had apparently made that decision before her mind had. She cried. Not the way she'd cried at the restaurant in Itaewon. Not the beaming, overwhelmed, happy tears that her mother had looked at and said, "You look so happy." This was different. This was what it felt like, when 2 years of believing something true revealed itself to be the cover story for something else entirely. The specific, physical grief of that, how it settled in the chest and the shoulders and the back of the throat. The couple 2 tables over were still arguing. A taxi went past outside. The fluorescent light didn't care. Eventually, she paid her bill. She walked to the address Na Yejin had shown her. She let herself into the apartment. She sat on the edge of the clean, anonymous bed. She thought about Gloria's voice. 6 generations of people who got back up. She lay down. She closed her eyes. She slept. The apartment's landline was on the kitchen counter. She called Taejun from it. She wasn't sure who had access to her cell records, and she was done being careless about what she didn't know. He answered in 2 rings. She told him everything again, but differently this time. Not the flat report she'd given her mother. Something raw. She told him about everything in details and everything concerning the contract she signed. How Junho had told her he had made her complicit in a crime. How she wasn't sure how in deep she was. Taejun listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "I hope you're still in the apartment I gave you." "Yes. Don't leave. Don't try to confront him again. Don't go back to that apartment again for now." A pause. "I'm going to connect you with an attorney today. She handles corporate fraud and immigration law. Her name is Cha Myeon." "Why are you doing this?" She had asked it at the gala, but she needed to hear it in daylight, without the music and the crisis and the chandelier light. He was quiet for a moment. Not hesitation. Something more considered than that. "Because, honestly, I can. And I don't get easily impressed. But Renee, you impressed me. I will not sit and watch you go down for what you didn't do." She did not ask more. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. Call Mayan. Today." 2 days after the gala, Renee messaged Ha-yoon. They hadn't really spoken in over a year. She stared at what she'd typed. "Can we talk?" For a long time before she sent it. Ha-yoon responded in 4 minutes. "I've been waiting for you to ask." They met at a coffee shop in Yongsan on a Wednesday afternoon. Ha-yoon was already there when Renee arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee ordered. And that small thing, the 2 cups, the waiting, the assumption that Renee was coming and would want coffee, made Renee's throat close before she even sat down. "I tried to be your friend," she said. Not an accusation, just the truth, placed down like evidence. "I know." Renee looked at the handwriting. Specific dates. She had spent 2 years believing this woman had talked about her. "He told me you were talking about me behind my back." Ha-yoon went completely still. The kind of still that comes from genuine shock rather than performance. "I have never," she said a single negative thing about you to anyone in that building. Not once. Not in years. Not ever. In all honesty, I've always admired you since you walked in and became the best closer. I just felt that the only thing I didn't envy was how you ended up trusting someone who always looked for every opportunity to belittle you." Renee believed her before she finished the sentence. She believed her the way you believe things when you have just finished understanding the machinery. When you can see exactly where the gear was placed and exactly how it turned. "I'm sorry," Renee said. Ha-Yun slid the notes across the table. Don't apologize to me. I'll always have your back. You know us girls have got to stick together. Cha Myeon's office was on the 21st floor of a building in Gangnam. Myeon herself was in her 50s, with a British accent from her years at LSE, and the manner of a woman who had spent her career in rooms where people had underestimated her and had long since found that more useful than annoying. She reviewed everything Renee could give her, the dates, the descriptions, every detail Renee could reconstruct from memory about what each page had looked like, how many there were, what Junho had told her each one said. Then she made calls. The shell account was not difficult to find once you knew where to look. The shell account exists. Your signature is on it. However, the transactions are small enough, and the trail is structured in a way that a competent fraud attorney, which I am, can credibly argue these as fraud committed against you, not by you. She folded her hands. He built a cage with thinner bars than he needed you to believe. He needed you afraid, not actually trapped. Renee sat with this. The relief came first, clean and sudden. Then, right behind it, something harder, something with edges. The understanding that the cage had been built partly from her own uncertainty, fear that he had manufactured slowly and deliberately over 2 years through corrected Korean and claimed promotions, and one friendship quietly severed. He had found the doubt that lives in everyone, and he had fed it carefully until it was bigger than her knowledge of herself. She had not been weak. She had been studied. What do we do? She asked. Mayan almost smiled. We start with the CEO of your firm. She came prepared, the way she always came prepared. Mayan was beside her. She had some notes Ha-Yun had given her, the photographs, and the timeline she had rebuilt from memory. And her memory, as Junho had never quite understood, was extraordinary. She forgot nothing that mattered. She told CEO Lee Byung-ho everything in the voice she had used 6 weeks ago in Taijun's conference room. Clean, without sentiment. Not because she wasn't feeling anything. She was feeling a great deal. But because she had learned long ago that the most powerful way to tell a truth was to let it carry its own weight. She watched his face move through the stages of understanding slowly and honestly, the way a man looks when he is realizing the full shape of what he allowed to happen inside a building he was responsible for. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long time. You didn't get that promotion, he finally said, even though it was yours, because I chose to believe what I was told instead of actually asking you if it was true. Yes, she said, that's correct. How can I make this up? I want the position I earned and a full investigation into how I have been represented internally and to clients during my time at this company. If what I'm hearing is true about how I've been misrepresented by Junho, then he should not get away with it. He looked at her for a moment across the desk. I'll begin today, he said. The investigation was quiet and thorough. Ha-Yun helped her with some documented records of times she personally heard Junho spreading lies about her. The CEO's own notes from the meeting, where a lie had been delivered as care, the shell account. It was a pattern assembled from enough individual instances that no single one could be denied in isolation because, together, they made something that could not be argued away. Kang Junho was terminated on a Thursday afternoon. He did not go to prison. The account was too small and the legal picture too murky for a swift criminal case. But he lost the job, the title, and the director position that had been built on a lie. The professional world in Seoul is not a large world. And the Yoon Group's name appearing in the adjacent legal conversation ensured that the people who needed to hear the right version of what had happened did hear it. He left the Daesung building with a box and no one walking him out. The elevator doors closed. That was the end of Kang Junho in Renee's story. Park Ji-yeon heard about it in pieces, the way the office always heard things. She sat at her desk one evening, after most people had gone home, and she thought about what she had believed and what had actually been true. She was 23, and she had thought she was chosen. Now she understood what she had been to him, and that understanding would sit in her chest for a long time before it became something she could put down. She did not reach out to Renee. There was nothing useful to say. There was no cruelty in what had happened to her. There was only a man who had seen an easier mirror and looked into it instead. Over the 6 weeks of the legal process, she kept ending up in the same rooms as Yoon Tae-jun. He provided the apartment and came by to check on things. His attorney, Mayan, had updates that sometimes required him to be present. He used those reasons as an excuse to always be around her. He found Renee interesting, gran, that's what he called it, and that's what he wanted to continue calling it. He'd watched her take care of her issues with Junho and was mesmerized by how she handled everything and how she carried herself. He knew deep down that he found her more than just interesting. She went back to her Tuesday lessons. Mrs. Han said nothing about the gap. She set out the materials, poured tea, and waited with the patience of someone who knew that the things people needed to return to would always find their way back. An hour in, Renee constructed a sentence in Korean, complex and grammatically correct. Mrs. Han looked at her, urging her to keep going, to keep the doubt out of her mind. When she finally completed the pronunciation, Mrs. Han's eyes lit up. "You see," she said in Korean. "You always knew more than you thought." Renee sat with that. "Someone kept telling me my Korean was worse than it was," she said. Mrs. Han poured more tea. She was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone who had suspected this for a long time, and was choosing to say only what was true and useful. "Your Korean," she said, "was never the problem." The investigation concluded. The record was corrected. Renee Ellis was now getting the glory she deserved. She was given the office with the window on a Tuesday morning. It was smaller than she'd imagined, actually. But the window looked south, and on clear days she could see the Han River between the buildings. A silver ribbon, unhurried, going wherever it was going. She put one thing on the desk: the photo from her mother's front steps the night before her flight. She was grinning in it. Her suitcase was behind her. She didn't know yet what Seoul would ask of her. She looked like someone at the beginning of something, which was exactly what she had been. She looked at her own face for a moment. Then she picked up the phone. "Mama, baby, warm, immediate. How'd it go?" "I got the job." The scream that came through the phone made her pull it away from her ear, laughing before she could stop herself. The real laugh, the one that had been locked away for 2 years, the one that sounded like herself. She sat in the office that was hers, laughing with her mother in Houston, and outside the window the Han River caught the morning light and held it. 3 months later, the restaurant had been on that corner for longer than any of them had been alive, and it showed in the way that good places show it, in the worn wood of the tables, in the way the owner moved through the room without looking at her feet, and in food that tasted like the recipe had been held in someone's hands long enough to become part of them. Renee and Taejun were at one end of the table. Ha-yoon and Na-yejin, who had become, over 3 months, something neither of them had anticipated, and both of them seemed to find faintly embarrassing to acknowledge, were at the other, deep in an argument that required hand gestures. The food was good. The conversation moved between all four of them in the easy way it moves when people have been through something together and come out the other side without losing each other. Ha-yoon said something that made Na-yejin spill her water laughing. Na-yejin recovered immediately, which made Ha-yoon laugh harder, and it was its own small, wonderful thing. At some point they excused themselves together. "Bathroom," they said, with the conviction of people who had arranged this exit in advance and were not at all convincing about it. Renee watched them go. She looked at Taejun. He looked back at her. Outside Seoul on a Saturday evening. Lights coming on in the buildings across the street. The city doing what it always did. Moving and breathing and going about its life without waiting for anyone. To be ready. "I want to stay," she said to herself, to the city, to the version of her life that had been built from what survived. "In Seoul, permanently. I want to build something here that belongs to me." "I know," he said. "Is that going to be complicated?" She looked at him. "What part?" "Any of it. All of it. You." He looked at her the way he had been looking at her since the gala, with the full, unhurried attention of a man who does not look carefully at things he isn't serious about. "Yes," he said. "All of it will be complicated. I don't have a version of this that isn't." She thought about that. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 2 years. I find honesty is more efficient." She laughed. He almost smiled, the almost smile she had been collecting since October, her private catalog of evidence. She picked up her chopsticks. "Okay," she said. complicated then. Outside, Seoul moved fast and lit up and went on without waiting. Inside this small restaurant on a corner in Insadong, a woman who had come to prove herself, nearly lost everything, and rebuilt it from the ground with her own hands, sat at a table with 3 people who had not known her 2 years ago and knew her now. She picked up a piece of food. She ate it. It was good. That was enough. That was everything. Renee was everything she should be. Hardworking, career-driven, and competent. And when you're all those things, even the worst force will not bring you down. If you enjoyed this story and related to Renee, then join our little community by smashing that subscribe button and hitting the notification bell. If you've gotten to this point, then drop a comment for us. Comment, Junho is the very worst, and I'll know you watched the whole story. Don't forget to also comment your favorite part of the story and where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next story.